Raisin stood at the window, staring down into the street below. There were hardly any more people out by day than by night. Those who were moving about on some business of their own walked with heads down, casting furtive looks this way and that. Raisin had seen cities in the grip of plague. He could smell fear in the air. Now he thought he could detect the same odor. And there, shining against the white stone pavement, was the line. Caramon walked into the room just behind Earwig, pushing the candle forward so that there would be no chance for him to escape. Raisin slowly turned around from the window. "How are you feeling?" Caramon asked. "How do I ever feel?" Raisin snapped. Seeing Caramon's hurt look, the mage shook his head. "I'm sorry, my brother. I feel as if a crushing weight were on me, as if I'd been sent here to do something important. Yet I haven't any idea what. And we don't have much time to do it." "What do you mean? We've got all the time in the world," said Caramon practically. "I've ordered breakfast. It'll be up in a moment." Time. Raisin turned back to the window, staring down at the white line. To find the gate. To be there when the time arrives. "We have no time, my brother. We have only until the Festival of the Eye. 3 days. Caramon frowned. "That's the poem you quoted, isn't it, Raisin?" Earwig piped up. "I remember it, you see. Darkness sends its agents, stealthy and black, to find the gate, to be there when the time arrives. I love stories, and that's as good as a story. Did I ever tell you the one about Dizzy Long-Tongue and the Minotaur?" "I think you dropped something," said Caramon, jostling one of the cander's pouches and spilling its contents on the floor. Glass and ivory game pieces rolled across the wood, one of the pieces coming to rest at Raisin's feet. Reaching down, he picked it up. It was a small, yellowing statue carved into the likeness of a beautiful woman. Beautiful, regal, evil, domineering. The mage held it up to his eyes, inspecting it, observing every tiny detail cut into the bone. Turning it over to look at the pedestal on which the woman stood, he saw an X on the bottom, a sign designating the piece as the Dark Queen in one of the mage's favorite games, Wizards and Warriors. "It can't be a coincidence," he murmured. "The cats decide the fate, and they are vanishing. The time of the great eye comes once again, when untold power awaits those who can use it. If I were the Dark Queen, and I wanted to choose a time to come back into the world." Raisin's voice died. Caramon scoffed. "Hey, don't talk like that, Race. You said it yourself. Coincidence. We'll find the cats and there'll be a perfectly logical explanation for their disappearance. Maybe it'll be like that story about the guy with the flute who came into a town and played, and all the rats followed him past the city limits." "But you forget the end of the story, my brother. In the end, the piper came back and stole away the children." Caramon kept silent. He didn't think he'd helped matters any. Looking at this game piece carefully one more time, Raisin handed it back to the candor. Earwig looked at the piece as carefully as the mage had, but he didn't find anything of interest. It was just another game piece. "Fate moves the free," Caramon said under his breath, repeating one of his current favorite proverbs. "What do we do now?" "It's time we explored the city of Mereklar." How about seeing this Counselor Chavez? Should we go meet her? I think, my brother, that I will let her come to me, said Raisin coolly. You're strangers, so you don't see it like we do. I guess not, ma'am, Caramon said. To me, this place looks overrun. No, sir, no. Where once there were thousands, there are now few, too few, said the old woman. That's true, added a man who was seated at another table. From morning to evening the cats would roam the streets, white, grey, brown, striped, spotted, mottled, all sorts. Except black, the old woman interposed. We never knew why, but there wasn't a black cat among the lot of them. Some think mages came and took the black ones, said the man, glowering darkly at Raisin. Raisin lifted an eyebrow and glanced at his brother. Caramon, looking uncomfortable, buried his head in a mug of ale. The three companions were wandering through the city, supposedly seeing the sights, but every time they came to any sort of a tavern, Raisin insisted on going inside. He left most of the conversing to his brother. The handsome, good-natured fighter took to people easily, and they likewise warmed to him. Caramon wondered at first how they were going to pay for what they drank, but all Raisin had to do was to produce the scroll case, and at the sight of it, no one ever asked them for money. Raisin listened and kept an eye on the candor, watching to note if anyone took an unusual interest in the skull necklace Earwig wore. We always left the plates of food and small bowls of milk outside our house for the cats to eat and drink, a middle-aged man told the warrior, though sometimes we simply left the doors open and waited for the cats to come inside, where they could join us for breakfast. They would always roam about on the streets or in the parks waiting to be petted, a young barmaid explained, her eyes on Caramon. No one would dream of harming them. After all, they'll one day save the world. The others in the tavern nodded in agreement. You haven't seen a guy around here playing a flute, have you? Caramon began, but his brother gave him such a vicious look that the big warrior lapsed into silence. They stood up to go. Damn all wizards to the abyss, one of the guests said as the magician left. Well, how rude, exclaimed Earwig. Caramon turned, fist clenched, but Raisin put his hand on his brother's knotted arm. Peace, Caramon. How can you just let them say things like that? The warrior demanded. Because I understand them, said Raisin in his whispering voice. These people are in the grip of fear, he added as they stepped out into the street. They've lived in the city all of their lives, and now the one thing that they hold sacred is disappearing, without reason, without a clue. I'm an easy target because I'm someone to blame. He looked down at the street. The white line was there, leading him on. They had not deviated from its patch since leaving the inn, although neither Caramon nor Earwig could see it. The council's home? Just keep walking straight up the street, said the man to Caramon in response to his question. Thank you, said the warrior, returning to his brother and the cantor, who were seated at an outdoor table at another tavern. They had seen a few cats since their arrival in Mereklar. Occasionally one would stroll past the companions as they were walking. Caramon had the strangest feeling that he was being scrutinized, examined by unblinking green eyes. Then more and more started coming around, and now Earwig was surrounded by cats. The felines jumped on his shoulders, batted at his topknot of brown hair, and rubbed themselves around his neck. The Kandor was overjoyed at the attention and more than willing to play with his new friends. Raisin, on the other hand, sat silent and alone. None of the cats would come near him. "Look at that," Caramon heard a woman whisper, and saw her pointing at the mage. "I know," said her companion. "I've never seen our cats act so unfriendly to anybody." "Maybe they know something we don't." A third woman hissed, "I bet the wizard has something to do with the missing cats. After all, there were no problems until he got here." "Your problem started before we arrived," Caramon began hotly, but once again his brother flashed him a warning look, and the fighter swallowed his words. "I've heard some people say that their kind are responsible for everything bad in the world." The mage ignored the words. He sat at his ease in a chair, sipping occasionally at a tiny porcelain cup containing a local specialty called hiava. The heat from the drink filled his body with welcome warmth, though the day was not particularly cold, and he wore the red robes that covered him from head to foot. Caramon sat down and tried to talk to his brother over Earwig's giggling. "Like the guards told us, all we have to do is follow Southgate Street to the center of the city, where we'll find the counselor's house. All roads lead there," the man said. "You can't get lost." "Don't you think that's a little unusual?" Raisin asked. "A house in the exact center of the city." "Yeah, I thought it was odd, but then again, this whole damn place is pretty odd," the fighter muttered. "I think I would like to see this house." Raisin reached over to touch Earwig's shoulder. The cats ceased playing with the Kandor and turned to stare at the mage, freezing in place as if they were statues. "Earwig," said Raisin, staring back at the cats. "It's time to leave." "All right," said the Kandor, always glad to be going somewhere other than where he was. "Come on, cats," he said, shoving at those perched on his lap. "I've got to go. Move." When the cats didn't budge, he stood up slowly from the wicker chair. The cats leaped off him but kept their eyes on Raisin. The mage drew the hood up over his face, covering his thin golden features from the light of day, finding refuge in the shadows of the robes. Taking the staff of mages in hand, he started walking up the street, Caramon and Earwig following back. The cats stood for a moment, then they too began to walk slowly after the companions, staying about 10 feet back. "Look at that," said Earwig in delight. Raisin paused, glanced around. The felines came to a halt. Raisin moved again, and the animals started after him again. More cats came to join their fellows, and soon the companions were being followed by a pack of fur and tails and shining eyes that moved without the slightest sound. "Why are they acting like that?" somebody asked. "Don't know. Maybe he's got them under a spell or something." "I doubt it. He knows that we'd do to him if he used any magic on our cats." Suddenly Raisin turned around and jerked the hood from his head. The cats scattered, fleeing, leaving the streets to the mage. Caramon had been to many cities and towns in his life, but none like Mereklar. There were more places to eat and drink on the little stretch of Southgate Street than the fighter could remember seeing in most villages, and there were actually places that specialized in one type of meal instead of serving the same thing night after night. And windows, the warrior said to himself in near disbelief. Where do people get the money for glass? There was every type of shop imaginable, selling wondrous things. They passed by a bookshop that had the name Oxford painted in the window. Displayed in front on a wooden pedestal was a huge dictionary, open in the middle. Raisin looked at the tome and sighed in longing. The price displayed was an almost unbelievable amount, more than Raisin imagined earning in a lifetime. As the mage walked down the avenue, more and more people began to stop what they were doing and stare at the red robes that hid the man of power. Some of the children ran up to Raisin, reaching out to touch the strange black wood staff with a golden claw and pale blue orb of crystal. The mage did not move the staff from their reach, it seemed, when they drew too near, as if the black rod itself warded them away. Caramon attracted attention as well. Men gazed at him, envying his youth and strength. Women watched him from out of the corners of their eyes, admiring his strong arms and broad chest, his curly brown hair and handsome face. "Hey, Caramon, why do all the girls stare at you?" Earwig asked wistfully. When the warrior looked their direction, the women turned red and buried their faces in their hands, giggling at Caramon's leer and his broad grin. "Probably never seen a sword this big," said the fighter, winking. Raisin snorted in contempt. Another hour passed, and the travelers could see Shavas's house. Earwig, with his sharper eyes, could make out some detail. "It looks like it's covered with plants, and its windows are made of colored glass." Raisin listened to the Cantor's description of the counselor's house with interest, though he didn't say anything. If what the Cantor said was accurate, the house was vastly different from every other house in the city. The mage stared ahead, leaning on his staff for comfort rather than any actual need. He felt unusually refreshed, even invigorated since his trial of the night before. The white line gleamed at his feet, shining brighter and more clearly with every step he took. Soon all the companions could clearly see the house, raised up on a hill of dirt, a perfect circle of earth that ended where the white stone of the streets and sidewalks began. The mound rose above the level of the city, and a stone path wound up to the counselor's house and around to the small groves that covered the hill of dirt. The top of the hill was large enough and flat enough to support a small pond, and streams ran out from it to water the colorful gardens along the sides of the estate. Raisin came to a halt, his gaze studying the stained glass windows. Fascinated, he watched the sunlight glance off the tinted panes, reflecting a variety of colors that shone in his eyes: red, blue, green, white, and black. 5 colors. It reminded him of his dream. 5 colors. The mage blinked his eyes and saw that the glass was nothing more than glass, held together by lead strips, bent into odd shapes that seemed somehow familiar. When he attempted to grasp where he had seen them before, his mind refused. Raisin suddenly felt weak and was unable to continue walking. "Caramon," he called out, his voice reaching the ears of his brother, who was a slight distance ahead. "I must rest." The mage slumped down in a chair that belonged to another hiawa shop. He leaned against the staff, his breath shortened, and he turned around with his back to the estate, lifting the cowl up over his head as Caramon hurried to his side. A nervous serving girl came out of the shop, bringing out 2 cups of the strong dark brew. "No," the fighter said. "He needs hot water." "This will be fine, my brother." Raisin snatched the drinks from the girl's hands. When his brother gave a questioning glance, the mage said, "I'm just a little tired from the walk." Raisin took his time, holding the ridiculously small handle between 2 fingers, swallowing slowly. Earwig sat down happily and began rummaging through his pouches. "See this?" the Kandra said, putting out a crystal quill shot through with veins of gold. "I found it lying in the street. I figured, if it's in the street, nobody wants it. And I found this." Earwig held up a sequin ball with a piece of yellow ribbon sewn on it. "Give that back," Caramon yelled, leaning across the table, his fingers groping for the candle. "It's mine, I found it." "It was mine first. That girl at the inn gave it to me, and it means a lot." "Then you shouldn't have dropped it," the candle scolded, handing the ball back to its rightful owner. It spun around, catching the sunlight, reflecting a myriad colors. "I swear, Caramon, you are so careless. Besides, it's a really good cat toy. They love it. See? Look at that black cat watching it." Raisin bent forward in his chair. "What black cat?" "That black cat," Earwig replied, pointing behind the mage. Raisin turned around to face the animal. The cat, not particularly large and very, very black, sat calmly, regarding the mage with wide, staring blue eyes. "Here, puss, puss, puss." Caramon bobbed the toy on its string. The cat stood a moment longer, staring at the mage in a contest of wills. Azure orbs against black hourglasses. Then the feline rose up from its place of the white stone street and calmly walked past Raisin. The animal batted the ball 3 times and sat down again, watching Caramon as it had watched his brother. Earwig, unwilling to be left out of the cat's attentions, reached down and petted its black fur. The cat showed no sign of pleasure or annoyance. It glanced at the candle briefly before resuming its observation of the fighter. Caramon coaxed it to play with the ball. Raisin, watching, rubbed his fingers against the staff's wood. This was the first black cat he had seen in the entire city of Mereklar, and he was about to cast a spell that would tell him if the animal was possessed by a spirit, making it a magician's familiar, when an open carriage drawn by 2 white horses turned a corner and rumbled up the street. The coat of arms on the carriage door was the same as that on the scroll case. "The counselor," said Raisin, nudging his brother. Caramon glanced around. Earwig leaped to his feet in excitement. The black cat crouched behind the Kandra's legs, hidden from view. "Stop!" stop here," came a clear voice. The carriage rolled to a halt in front of the Hiava shop. A woman stood from her seat. She was dressed in rippling white silk, her skin nearly as pale as the cloth she wore. Dark brown hair was bound tightly around her head in a thick braid. Around her neck, suspended by a golden chain, hung a red fire opal. The woman gazed at the three imperiously. "I am Councillor Chavas. Please join me for dinner." Then she was gone, her horses bearing the carriage forward to the estate on the hill, her deep sensual voice echoing in the companion's thoughts. Chapter 11. "My family has lived in Mereklar for hundreds of years," Councillor Chavas said, sitting in front of the fire in the main library of her estate after a sumptuous dinner, a large untouched glass of brandy in her fine hands. The flames played behind her, casting flickering lights and shadows, framing her poised, fluid form. She talked comfortably with the brothers, as if she had known them all their lives. Her beauty was matchless. Her voice was like sweet, flowing amber. Small wonder, then, that neither Caramel nor Raisin noticed the absence of the candor. "And you say your ancestors lived in the surrounding countryside?" Raisin huddled near the fire. He held a glass of brandy in his golden hand, and it also remained untouched. The mage, unwilling to sacrifice his self-control for physical pleasures. His hood was cast back, and the fire flared in his eyes, filling their darkness with flame. "Yes, that is correct. I am, however, unsure of the exact location," the councillor replied. Raisin saw that although the woman spoke to both him and his brother, she kept her gaze fixed on him. And he did not see in her eyes the loathing or fear he was accustomed to seeing in the eyes of women. In the eyes of this woman he saw fascination, admiration. It made his blood tingle. Perhaps their origin could be found in this library, Raisin suggested, sweeping an arm to indicate the thousands of volumes of books lining the walls. He remembered what he'd been told, that some of them were magical. "If you would like, I could help you search." "Yes, I think I would like that very much," the councillor said. A slight flush suffused her pale skin. She glanced into her drink, then lifted her large eyes to stare again at the mage. Raisin studied the woman in front of him. Something was wrong. Something was bothering him, nagging at him, demanding his attention. But dazzled by her beauty, he couldn't think what. Perhaps it was Chavas herself. She had told them much and nothing. He'd learned more talking with people in the street. He felt she was hiding something she would reveal to him alone. The mage cast a sharp, meaningful glance at his brother. Caramel pretended not to notice. He had witnessed his brother's dealings with others before. He knew of Raisin's constant manipulations and maneuverings, the way he let a subtle hint fall on interested ears, alluding to things he only guessed at, coercing his prey into letting slip information that was best kept from the knowledge of others. The fighter was always ashamed by the mage's need to display cognitive superiority over others. Besides, Caramel didn't want to leave the presence of this beautiful woman. Caramel had noted that, though she talked to Raisin, she seemed to be constantly looking at the big warrior. "Well, Master Wizard," said Chavas, breaking what had become an uncomfortable silence, Will you and your brother help our city in our hour of grave need? It says here, the mage stated, putting a rolled piece of parchment from under his robes, that the fee for the job is negotiable. Exactly how much room for negotiation exists? The fee quoted by the Minister of Finance is 10,000 steel pieces, Shavas said. Caramon's mouth dropped open. 10,000 steel was more money than he had made in his life, let alone at once. Thoughts of what such a large sum of money could buy raced through his head. An inn? No, a huge tavern with a fireplace in the middle and a dozen rooms and stables out and back. He imagined a house perched high in the Vallon woods of Soleis and grew so excited that he stood up and began to roam around the room, bumping into things, overturning a small chair. Caramon, said Rayson irritably, where is Earwig? I don't know, Caramon answered. It's not my day to watch him. The councillor looked alarmed, her face filling with sudden apprehension. I don't want him wandering around my house. There are too many precious things that shouldn't be touched. Would you go and search for him, sir? Caramon, looking into the woman's eyes, felt that if she had asked him to go to the abyss and find a 5-headed dragon, he would have left immediately. Sure, glad to, my lady, he said. He walked out of the room by the side door, closing it loudly behind him. Rayson stood from his chair, using the staff of mages for support, though he felt no more tired than he had earlier that afternoon. Walking to a bookshelf, he leaned against it, stealing surreptitious glances at the texts. Perhaps whatever was troubling him emanated from the books. There is something I need to ask you, my lady. Call me Shavas, please, she said, moving nearer to him. The mage ran a golden hand along the spines of several books. Dust collected on his fingers, and he regarded the fine grey powder with a frown, disliking the treatment the texts received. He rubbed his fingers together, letting the dust fall onto the carpet. What is our success worth to you? I'm afraid I don't understand the question, Shavas replied, shaking her head slightly and furrowing her arched brows. It is very simple, Counselor, Rayson said, moving unconsciously nearer to her. What value do you place on our success? It would mean saving the city and the entire world, of course. It means everything to me, because unless you succeed, there will be nothing left but darkness and despair. Shavas said this casually, without undue excitement. She even smiled slightly, as if darkness and despair weren't anything she couldn't handle. What do you expect me to say? That your success is worth the wealth of the entire city? That you could take anything you wanted, Master Wizard? She glanced at Rayson alluringly. He felt his body react to her presence and immediately angrily raised his defenses. I am not a Master Wizard. I have not attained that high level, he said with mocking humility. Forgive me. I was only asking on principle. I'm sorry if you feel offended, he added, pulling the cowl of his red robes over his head. The counselor stepped away from him. Then you agree to our terms? Oh, no, I didn't say that at all. I will have to take time to consider, the mage said from the depth of his robes. You will tell me tomorrow? Shavas inquired with a touch of impatience. Perhaps. Rayson turned back to the fire and was startled to feel Shavas moving again to stand near him. gold mask in place, he asked harshly, "Is there something wrong, counselor?" "No," she said, pulling back slightly and placing a hand over the necklace she wore at her throat. "It's just that I've never been this close to a mage before." "You have no mystics in Mereklar?" Raisin asked with a rise in his voice. "Yes, that is correct. No mage has entered the city for a very long time." "And why is that, I wonder?" "I don't know." Shavas shrugged wide shoulders. After a moment's consideration, she added, "There was a wizard who lived in the mountains, but I hear he was killed long ago by some evil force." "Spooks," said Raisin, half smiling. "What?" The woman looked startled. "Nothing. Just some inanity of my brother's. What kind of force killed him?" "I'm not sure. It's only a legend which began long before I was born. What you said about spooks, though, I have heard that he was killed by ghosts. Is that common among wizards?" "That type of magic is not in the realm of my studies, counselor. I am not a necromancer." Shavas leaned forward slightly. "Have you ever considered becoming one?" She was almost touching him. Raisin stared at her. "Why, counselor?" he asked softly. "Are you offering to teach me?" The woman laughed merrily. "How droll you are! As if I could teach you anything. I know nothing of magic and magicians." "Yes, my lady, that is what you claim. But why do you ask a question like that? And why do you keep a library filled with magical books if you can't read them?" The mage wondered, but he said nothing. A moment of silence passed between counselor and magician. Raisin looked slowly around the library. Shavas stood motionless, her head angled slightly back to observe the mage's movements. The braid of her hair shone a rich reddish brown. No light from the fire reached her deep green eyes, but they glittered like emeralds. "Where were you going before you decided to come to Mereklar?" she asked. Raisin ran his fingers along the volumes, reading some of their titles and the names of the authors who wrote them. "You have an excellent collection of books, counselor," he said, finding a particularly interesting manuscript, "History of Modern Philosophies." "Thank you, but you still haven't answered my question." Raisin turned to face his hostess, letting the book fall back into place. "My companions and I were on our way across New Sea on personal business." His voice was cold, almost insulting. "Now it is my turn to say that I am sorry if I have offended," the counselor said, gliding back to her seat. Raisin took advantage of the opportunity to dip his finger slightly into the glass he had set on a nearby table. When he was sure the counselor was not looking at him, he drew his finger across his eyes, causing them to tear from the alcohol. The mage scanned the room quickly, staring up at the ceiling and to the walls. The line, the stream of age and untold power, did not appear. Where is it? It must lead here from Southgate Street and cut through the house. Raisin moved to look out a window to the road that led from the gate, hoping he would find the line there, but the pane of glass was opaque. "Are you looking for something, Raisin?" Shavas asked in concern. "I have a cinder in my eyes," he said, rubbing them. Then the knowledge struck him. He knew what had been bothering him. His hourglass eyes saw the effect of time on everything upon which his gaze fell. The masters of the tower had cast this curse upon him, hoping to teach him compassion for others, hoping to remind him that all men were alike, all men dying. He saw the books on the shelves rotting away, their leather bindings cracking and fading. He saw the tables lose their lacquered sheens and grow old, their timbers and slats fall in scattered stacks. But when he looked at Chavez, he saw her young, beautiful, unchanging. "This can't be," he railed, massaging his eyes with his hand. When he opened his eyes again, he felt his body grow cold. The councillor's form was now nothing but a rotting corpse, struck down by the passage of untold eons, an abomination to life, something unspeakable and unnatural, a travesty that must be destroyed. "What new joke have the masters played on me now?" Raisin demanded silently. He dug the heels of his hands into his eyes, attempting to shut out the horrible sight he had just witnessed. "What is wrong?" Chavez asked, rising to her feet. She moved closer, and Raisin felt her hands touch his golden flesh. He felt the touch of a woman, the fatal touch of something he never expected to feel. "As I've said, I'm fine," Raisin replied tersely. He snatched his arm away from the woman's grasp. She gazed at him, hurt, reminding him of Caramon. Raisin sighed. His hand reached for the staff, but he had left it standing beside the bookshelves. "Please forgive me, Counselor. I'm not used to anyone touching me. I apologize if I seem rude." "No apologies are necessary, Raisin. I think I understand. You have been misused, ill-treated. You raise your defenses swiftly." The councillor lifted her hand and placed it on the major's arm. "I assure you, sir," she murmured, drawing nearer until he could smell the fragrance of her hair, "that you need no defenses around me." Raisin caught his breath, feeling as if he were smothering. But the sensation, unlike his illness, was a pleasant one. She was beautiful to his eyes, the only thing of beauty he'd seen in a long, long time. His arm glided around the woman's slender body, and he pulled her near. Chapter 12. Caramon walked the corridors of the councillor's house, becoming increasingly nervous with each step, though he could not imagine why. Nothing in the estate had been any more menacing than an inanimate suit of armor in the library. He rubbed at the muscles in his right leg, a very slight bruise rising blue on his flesh. "How did that happen?" he asked himself. "I don't remember bumping into anything." The hall led him from the library to the middle of the house. Here the corridor was dimly lit with a strange color, vaguely purple or lavender. Brass oil lamps, spaced at regular intervals and mounted directly to the wall, gave only a faint glow, the frosted glass covering the wicks and diffusing the yellow-white flames into almost nothing. "Why the devil does she keep it so dark in here?" Caramon said to himself, wondering which of the many doors the candor might be behind. "Earwig! Earwig! Where are you?" He wandered the house calling, waiting for an answer, and finally, after what seemed like hours, heard one. "Caramon, is that you?" "Of course it's me. Where are you?" "In here." Caramon walked a few paces to a door in the middle of the hall. He twisted the knob, walked in, and stopped dead. Shava's bedroom, he said. He knew he should leave. He knew what he was doing was highly improper. But he couldn't help himself. The beauty and alluring mystery of the room seemed to beckon him forward. Besides, he told himself, he'd heard the candor voice, and the last thing the lady would want would be the candor in amid her personal belongings. "I'll just slip in and take a quick look around for Earwig," Caramon said softly, entering the room. Without quite knowing what he was doing or why, he shut the door behind him. The councillor's bedroom was comfortably lit, much brighter than the hallway. An abundance of candles burned in holders, each a different shape from the other, each some type of animal or creature, griffins, dragons, and other wondrous or grotesque creatures. The melting wax gave off a faint perfume that reminded Caramon of the woman herself. Desire made him tingle, and he found himself standing next to her bed. The bed frame was made of brass, decorated with the same bizarre creatures who held the candles. It dominated the back of the room. Curtains and drapes of gray silk hung from the ceiling and metal supports. Dressers and drawers were scattered about, lacquered black and red and orange, with pictures of odd birds and twisted trees and weird flowers. There were 6 chairs of the same design. Small boxes of gold and silver and other precious metals, their intricate detail and textures belaying a hint of great age, covered 3 tables. Though he was no expert in metal working, the fighter could tell that the boxes were built by a master craftsman. The floors were embellished by a rich carpet, filled with swirls and ribbons and circles, the same colors as everything else in the room. Several mirrors were mounted to the walls, and a full-size mirror, held by a frame of gold, stood in one corner, reflecting Caramon's image. The warrior noticed that his reflection in the mirror seemed to be coming from farther away than he actually was. "How long have I been standing here?" he asked out loud, blinking, the sound of his voice lifting the fascinating, lascivious spell of the room. "And where's Earwig?" Glancing about nervously, the fighter searched the room. He found nothing, no sign of a candor. "I should leave," he said, leaning on a smooth black-stained table painted with orange flowers and green leaves. The wood felt surprisingly warm under his palms. Without thinking, he took hold of a piece of cloth that had been thrown casually on the table, his fingers caressing it. Moving to sit on the bed, he held the cloth without noticing what he was doing, working his hands over the cool, smooth fabric. "The counselor is the most magnificent woman I've ever seen," he murmured. The cloth was growing warm beneath his fingers. "I wonder what she's like," Caramon said very softly. Rising to his feet, he walked over to the full mirror again, studying his face, a face many considered handsome. His body was scarred from numerous battles, his muscles held unmatched strength. Drawing a deep breath, the fighter watched his huge chest expand, his arms grow firm. Then he saw what he held in his hand. "What am I doing?" Face burning in embarrassment, he moved swiftly back to the table, starting to replace the black silk shawl he had been fondling, when a high-pitched voice shrilled behind him. "What have you got in your hand, Caramon?" "Nothing," he yelled, spinning to face the Kandor, who was gazing up and smiling at the fighter. "What's that?" Earwig asked, reaching around Caramon to the table. "Don't touch it," the warrior said quickly. "Just something of the councillors." "Oh," the Kender said, shrugging. "Come on, Earwig. We shouldn't be in here," said Caramon severely, feeling guilty and taking it out on the Kender. The warrior headed hurriedly for the door. Earwig started to follow when he noticed a small box sitting on one of the tables. "Pick me up, pick me up." "What?" said Earwig, pausing, staring at the box in delight. "I didn't say anything," snapped Caramon, bumbling into a large hand-painted screen. He almost knocked it over and was grappling with it, trying to keep it from falling. "Pick me up, pick me up." "You bet," cried the Kender. Grabbing the box, he thrust it quickly into one of his pouches. "Earwig!" Caramon having righted the screen, was standing near the door. He was using that voice again. Earwig caught up with him and they left the room, the warrior carefully shutting the door behind them. "What's the matter, Caramon?" the Kender asked, noting that the big man's face was red as he appeared to be breathing more rapidly than normal. "Nothing, just leave me alone," Caramon ordered, tromping down the hall. Open me, open me." "This is truly remarkable," said Earwig happily as he reached into his pouch for the box. There was really no reason why he shouldn't open it in front of Caramon, but the Kender felt a sudden need to keep the marvelous box hidden from his friend. Letting the warrior get ahead of him, Earwig flicked the catch with his finger. The lid of the box flew open. Inside was a single ring, a plain gold band without stone or engraving, nestled in red velvet. Earwig frowned in disappointment, having hoped to find something more interesting. After all, the box had talked to him. "So, where were you?" Caramon demanded, stopping dead in his tracks to confront the Kender. "Hiding behind a curtain?" Earwig thrust the box beneath his tunic. "Curtain? I wasn't behind any curtain." "I heard you call my name from that room. You must have been somewhere. One of the dressers?" Earwig shook his head. "I don't know what you're talking about, Caramon. I came into that room looking for you." The warrior glared at the Kender skeptically. Then, shrugging, he shook his head and sighed. "It's this weird house. It's got me hearing things. So where have you been?" "Well, I've been to Solis and Thelgard and Southern Urgoth and—" "I mean, where in the house?" Caramon shouted, exasperated. "Oh, why didn't you say so?" Earwig said, slapping himself in the forehead with the palm of his hand, raising his eyes to heaven. "There's a really fantastic room that's filled with plants, and they're all growing indoors." "Plants?" Caramon repeated. "Are you sure there's a room with plants in it?" "Yeah, it's all hot and steamy in there, too." "Uh-huh. Next you'll tell me there's a secret chamber somewhere." "Well, how did you know—" "Name of the abyss, Earwig, quit making up these wild tales of yours." Caramon stalked off down the hall. "Come on, I think we should be getting back to Raced." "Sure, Caramon," Earwig said cheerfully. He slipped the ring onto his finger. "You and Caramon are twins?" Shavas asked from across the small table. Raisin glanced up from the game board before him, startled by the observation. He had made no mention of it before. "I didn't think it was that obvious," he said dryly. "Granted, you don't resemble each other, but you and your brother are more alike than perhaps either of you realize." "I doubt that, Lady Shavas," The same informant who told you of our plans to come to Mereklar must have given you this information as well. Don't be angry, Raistlin, the lady said, looking at him with her splendid eyes, the eyes that did not age. With such terrible trouble coming to our city, it is my duty as counselor to divine the intent and motives of all who visit Mereklar. She was right, of course. Racing grudgingly admitted and sneered at himself. This cursed nature of his that must gain dominion of everything, everyone, despite the fact that he could still taste the sweetness of her lips on his. The game board was a block of unidentifiable grayish metal, the length of a forearm and many inches thick, checkered on top with alternating squares of silver and ebony. The mage reached over and moved the carved figure of a man on a horse 2 paces left and 1 forward. An excellent move, but one with which I am familiar, the counselor smiled, taking a piece of gold, a small rectangle with a raised square at one end, from a scale set to the side of the players. She placed it among a small pile she was accumulating. The scales tipped toward the mage. Shavas moved one of her own pieces, a man with a large shield and spear, from in front of Racin's knight, next to 2 other knights on the same row. She placed a thick metal bar under her men, creating a barrier Racin's horsemen could not cross. The mage deployed one of his own pieces, a tower, behind his cavalrymen, and took a larger bar from his own side of the scales, causing them to tilt slightly, though still in his favor. He removed the barrier, and the 3 men from the board, pushing his knight forward 1 square. I am familiar with that move as well, Racin said, leaning back in his chair, regarding the board with calculating eyes. His tactic had forced Shavas to expend important magic, represented by the ingots, and move a piece from the side of the board where the mage's real concentration of forces was waiting. He had caused her to sacrifice 3 yeomen, a fortification, and position in the game through his diversion. Shavas also leaned back in her chair, measuring the amount of magic she had available, reading the gauge at the top of the scales, a pointer leaning to her opponent's advantage. You play an excellent game, Master Mage. Thank you. I have been playing a long time. The door opened with a bang, slamming back against a wall. Caramon and Earwig clumped into the room. I found him, said Caramon. Found who? Me? I wasn't lost, was I? Was I lost, Raistlin? Asked Earwig. The mage, watching Shavas, saw the woman's gaze fasten on Earwig. Her eyes glinted, the lids narrowed. Racin glanced swiftly at Earwig and saw that the Cantor's collar was askew. The cat's skull necklace shone brightly in the firelight. He looked swiftly back to the counselor, but her face was expressionless. Surely I was mistaken, he thought, a cold chill convulsing him. It took you long enough. What have you been doing? He demanded, speaking tersely to cover his emotion. Just walking around, Caramon mumbled. He looked down at the game they were playing. Wizards and warriors. Never could get the hang of that. Many people have difficulty mastering it, Caramon, the woman said soothingly. I guess I just don't have the head for long-term strategies, the fighter confessed. The councillor's eyes met his. She seemed to say that she admired men who were above playing silly games. The warrior felt the blood rush to his face. "Hey!" Earwig cried excitedly. "Those pieces are just like the pieces in my pouch. Do you want to see?" The Kender, plopping himself down on a couch, bumped into Caramon, causing the big man to lose his balance and jostle the game board. Pieces rolled everywhere. "You clumsy oaf! We've been playing this game for hours!" Raisin snarled in anger. I'm sorry, Race." The warrior said in confusion. He started to add something, but a look from the councillor made him forget what it was. "No harm done," Shavas said, smiling up into Caramon's eyes. "We should return to discussing business anyway. Your brother and I were only passing the time until you came back." Her look told Caramon that she'd been counting the moments. The warrior had never met a woman so fascinating, so alluring. He couldn't understand how he'd stayed away from her for so long. It was the house, this strange house. "What kept you anyway?" Raisin asked. "Surely it didn't take that long to find the Kender?" "I wasn't lost," said Earwig sternly. "I knew where I was the whole time. If anyone was lost, it was Caramon. I found him in... Ouch!
"What? Oh, sorry, Earwig. I didn't mean to sit on you."
Extricating the Kender from beneath him, Caramon moved to the other side of the couch, near his brother. "As you already know," the councillor began, waiting for all her guests to settle themselves, "Mereklar's welfare depends on the cats that live here. They protect us from evil in the world. The prophecy—" "We've read the prophecies," interrupted Raisin shortly. "But perhaps you can tell us who gave them." "I'm sorry, I can't. May I continue? Recently the cats have started to disappear. Nobody knows why. Nobody knows where they have gone. The citizens are beginning to fear for their lives. They believe the prophecies, you see. They fear the end of the world is coming." "Do you know the origins of the city?" she asked all three companions. "We have heard some things about Mereklar," the mage replied, "but perhaps you could fill in the missing details." Shava smiled slightly, nodded her head. "Nobody's certain of the origins of the city except that it apparently survived the cataclysm untouched. Unfortunately, its inhabitants did not. When the people living in the surrounding lands fled to the city, they discovered that all of the buildings were empty. Mereklar's citizens, if there were any, had disappeared." "What do you mean, if there were any?" "There are those who believe that the city dates only from the cataclysm, that it wasn't here before then. Absurd, I know, but I thought I would mention it to you." Where was I? Ah, yes. In time, some of the families took over key positions of state, helping everyone live together in this new place. "And your family was among them?" Raisin asked. "That is correct. My family have always been councillors, those who direct and guide all aspects of the city. Lord Brunswick is the Minister of Agriculture and keeps track of the lands that produce our food. Lord Alvin is Minister of Property. The others are lords and ladies of their respective spheres, such as the Sergeant at Arms, Master of the Libraries, and similar functions. There are 10 in all." Shavas shifted languidly in her chair. Her hand gracefully drew the folds of her clinging gown away from her throat, revealing her long arched neck and marble-white skin. The brothers stared transfixed. When I say that there were no signs of the former inhabitants, I am not wholly correct, Shavas murmured, her fingers toying with her opal necklace. We found the prophecies, which were discovered in every home without exception. These books were here, in the library, and then there were the cats, Earwig cried. Raisin and Caramon both started, the Cantor's voice causing them to awaken from dreams of desire. Yes, that's right, Earwig. The counselor smiled at the Cantor. The cats, thousands roamed the streets freely. They were always friendly, and they seemed glad to have people around. The new citizens of Mereklar took the felines to be a sign from the gods.
When did you start noticing the disappearance of the cats? Caramon asked, clearing his throat.
A little more than a month ago.
How did you know they were gone? I mean, there's still a lot of them wandering around.
It was, of course, difficult to tell since there were so many cats already in the city, but people had made pets of the cats. Or perhaps the cats had made pets of the people. It's difficult to tell sometimes. They noticed that the cats were disappearing, and then we saw that the total number of cats in the city had decreased alarmingly. And you're sure that they are not hiding somewhere or just walking outside the city walls? Shavas's brows came together slightly. We are not fools.
Caramon flushed brightly red. I didn't mean...
I'm sorry, sir, the counselor sighed. Forgive me. This has been a very trying time. Yes, we are sure. We would not have offered the reward otherwise.
Just what exactly do you want us to do? Raisin asked.
Why, we want you to discover what's happening to the cats and stop it, Shavas said, looking surprised. You say we. Am I to assume that the other members of the city council want our aid as well? Raisin regarded the woman carefully and thought he saw her grow slightly paler. Her eyes fell before his. Some are reluctant to hire outside. Shavas hesitated, completing the sentence. Raisin's lips twisted in a grim smile. What you mean to say, lady, is that the other members of the council do not want a sorcerer in their town because they think their problem is a fault of the magical community. Don't be angry, Raisin. Shavas gazed at him with pleading eyes. The other members of the council do blame wizards for the cat's disappearance. For the moment, I have convinced them, however, that your help is needed, that not all magicians are evil. Won't you help us, please?
Caramon could almost feel the satisfaction flowing from his brother, the satisfaction at having made this beautiful, desirable woman crawl. The fighter was furious at his twin. He moved to reach out and comfort his hostess. Just then he saw Earwig stuffing all the counselor's knights and yeomen into his pouch. Sighing, Caramon changed the direction of his reach and nabbed the Cantor. Put those back.
Put what back?
Those game pieces.
Why, they're mine.
No, they're not. Yes, they are. Ask Raisin. He was looking at them in the room this morning. Here's the Dark Queen, and here's the other Dark Queen. Why, I have two now. Isn't that wonderful? Caramel snatched the cander's pouch, ignoring Earwig's wail of protest, and dumped its contents out on the game board. Do you see anything else that belongs to you, my lady? Chavas's gaze flicked over the candor and rested a moment on the ring on his finger. No, she said to Caramel. Thank you. It is past time for us to leave. Raisin, leaning on the staff, pulled himself up. I'm tired, and I have much to think about. I will have my carriage drop you at the inn. You will tell me if you have decided to take the job tomorrow, Raisin? Chavas asked, rising gracefully to her feet. Perhaps, my lady. The mage replied, bowed, and left the room. Chapter 13. Why do you treat people like that, Raist? Caramon demanded, sitting forward on the comfortable leather seats of the councillor's private carriage. This vehicle was enclosed to protect against the chill of the evening. Raisin glanced at his twin, amused at his brother's unusually antagonistic tone. Treat people like what? You know, Caramon couldn't exactly put his ire into words. She's done nothing to hurt you. Hasn't she? Raisin murmured, but the words were muffled in the cowl of his red robes. He stirred slightly. Don't be naive, Caramon. She wants our help only so long as it suits her needs. You heard her confess that the other council members hate us and are going to hire our services only because they have to. They only hate you, Caramon said, then snapped his mouth shut. He couldn't imagine why he'd said that, except that suddenly he wasn't feeling well. His insides were twisting like snakes. Raisin regarded his brother with a steadfast gaze. Well, said Earwig, are we going to take the job or aren't we? What difference does it make to you, Kender? Raisin asked irritably. Since when did you ever care about work? Earwig blinked, rubbing his hand. The skin around one of his fingers itched. I care about a lot of things. You never take me seriously, that's all. And you should, he stated, glaring at his companions. If you don't, someday you'll be sorry. Calm down, muttered Caramon, rubbing his hand over his churning stomach. We'll take the job. There was never any doubt of that, Raisin remarked. Then when do we start? What do we do first? I've got to know, Earwig cried loudly. Caramon looked at his friend, face wrinkling in confusion and pain. Why? I just do, that's all, Earwig said defiantly, flinging himself back into the seat and crossing his arms over his small chest. What's wrong with you tonight? Caramon stared at him. What's wrong with any of us? Raisin snapped. No one said anything. Each of the twins could have found his own answer, though neither spoke it aloud. The ride back to the tavern was quiet, the night very still. Raisin saw decorations hanging from many of the houses in preparation for the upcoming Festival of the Eye. He shook his head slowly, tapping the staff of mages on the floor. These people, they're so foolish. They celebrate, they dance. They don't know why. They don't understand the terrible sacrifice that brought about this holiday, he said inwardly. Raisin thought back to his time with the counselor. The intimacy they'd shared had been exciting and over too soon. She'd slipped from his embrace as swiftly as she'd entered it, whispering something about the servants. Racing, to distract himself, to focus his mind back on what was important, had inspected the books on the shelves. He'd found texts on thaumaturgy, sorcery, summoning. He thought he'd glimpsed rare volumes on naming magics, illusions, invocations. Wonders from the ages lined the shelves, wonders that had been missing for hundreds of years. I heard of some of these books while I was apprenticed. Why are they here? Why does she have them? He asked himself. Rayson seemed to recall her saying something about the books being there when her family arrived after the cataclysm. That was a credible answer, of course, but the mage tried to recall everything he had seen in the room, every decoration, statuette, picture. On a table were 5 stones of unusual hues and colors, each the length of a finger and very smooth, shining in the firelight. They might match the description of the lost ascending stones. There was a model of the universe, a contraption of brass, a construction of moving parts, spheres and gauges, springs for winding, coils that release their energy when tightened. Rayson felt a hand on his. He jumped, then relaxed quickly when he saw that it was only Caramon's. "Don't touch me, you know I hate it," the mage snarled. "I'm sorry, Race, but I don't feel very good." "Really?" "Chirac," he whispered. The staff's light gleamed in the carriage. Rayson stared into his brother's face. The warrior's features were sunken and his eyes had dark rings under them, as if he'd been awake for many days. His back was bent and his shoulders sagged. It must have been the brandy. Sorry, that's Caramon saying that. It must have been the brandy, Caramon concluded, groaning and leaning against the side of the carriage. "Just how much did you have to drink?" Rayson asked. "Not much," Caramon mumbled defensively. Rayson regarded his brother silently. Caramon could generally drink most men under the table. Reaching out his hand, the mage closed his fingers over his brother's wrist, felt his pulse rapid and thready. Beads of sweat began to pop out on the warrior's forehead and upper lip. Rayson knew the symptoms, knew them well, but he denied it to himself. "You should learn to control your appetites, my brother," said the mage. The carriage dropped them off in front of the inn. This time it was Rayson who assisted his twin inside the door of Barnstoke Hall. "I'm all right, Rayson, honest," said Caramon, ashamed of his weakness. He stood up straight, refusing his brother's arm. Rayson looked at him, then shrugged and, leaning on his staff, walked toward the stairs. Earwig trudged along behind. The Cantor's head was bowed. He looked neither to the right nor the left, but kept his eyes straight ahead on the floor in front of him. Caramon followed, staggering slightly, wondering if the ceiling was actually going to cave in on him as it seemed. The proprietor stood behind the desk at the side of the main room, looking through a stack of books, making notes with a black quill. He looked up when he heard his guests arrive. "You're returning late. It's way past the middle of the night. I assume your meeting with the council went well then, sirs?" "I don't see that it's any business of yours," Rayson said softly as he passed by the desk, ascending the stairs, heading up to their room. The proprietor, affronted, went back to his work. Caramon stumbled over the stairway, falling to his knees. Rayson looked back, pausing in concern. "Go ahead,"
Caramon waved his brother on. I just need to rest. I'll meet you in the room. The fighter heaved himself off the floor, leaning against the stairwell. Earwig, not looking around, kept climbing the stairs. Rayson stared after the Kender, who was acting every bit as strangely as Caramon. The mage wasn't certain whom to assist. I will wait for you here, on the landing, my brother, he said, keeping one eye on Caramon and one on Earwig. The warrior, nodding, made it up the stairs. Rayson took the big man's arm and helped him to the room. Earwig, open the door. The Kender nodded and did as he was told without comment, acting as if he were walking in his sleep. Caramon stumbled headlong into the room. Lifting his head, he caught, by the light of the staff, a quick glimpse of movement in a dark corner. Rest, he began, but before he could say anything more, his brother had shoved him to one side. A dart, its point glittering in the staff's light, sped from the darkness straight at the fighter. Rayson threw himself in the path of the missile, opening his cloak to create a shield of cloth. Two more darts followed, burying themselves in the cloth of red robes before they reached their target. The assassin dashed forward, a figure in black, dodging around the mage with the agility of an acrobat. He leaped over the dumbfounded Kender, took the stairs to the first floor in one jump, and disappeared into the street. Raistlin ran to the window, putting a shard of glass from a pouch to use in a spell, but the assassin was already gone. Turning, he hurried back to his brother, who was lying on the floor. Caramon, are you hurt? He asked, kneeling at his brother's side. No, I don't think so. Looking up into his twin's face, Caramon saw true concern, true worry. Warmth spread through his body, banishing the sickness for a moment. Somewhere deep inside, Rayson cared for him. The knowledge was worth facing all the assassins in the world. Thanks, Raist, he said weakly. Rayson inspected his robes and pulled the 3 darts from the cloth. 2 were lodged in the folds. The third had struck a metal disc, the charm of good fortune he had received from the woman at the Black Cat. He looked at the amulet with a touch of amusement. Earwig, aimlessly roaming the room, found another dart that the assassin had dropped. Without saying anything to the brothers, the Kender slipped it into his pocket. Do you need anything, Caramon? Rayson asked. No, nothing. I just need to rest. The warrior collapsed on the bed. His brother sat by his side. Rest. I thought you said nobody'd hurt us now. Too many people knew we were here. It wasn't us they were after, Caramon, said Rayson thoughtfully, studying the dots. It was you. Ah? The warrior propped himself up on his elbow. Why would anyone want to kill Caramon? Earwig yawned. The darts were aimed directly at you, none at me or the Kender. And this strange illness, if I hadn't been there, you wouldn't have been able to react, to get out of the way. You would have been easy prey, my brother. Rayson held one of the darts up to a lamp. The mage sniffed at the tip and drew his face back, wrinkling his nose in obvious repugnance. Thorodrone, he said, pursing his lips and sniffing again. Definitely an extremely deadly poison. You are fortunate he didn't hit you, Caramon. he would have been dead in an instant. He held the dart over the flame of a nearby lamp, causing the tip to glow green. Spitting on his fingers, then rubbing them together lightly, Raisin flaked off the poison, now turned ash-gray on the black metal. He did the same to the other 2 darts, then deposited them carefully in one of his pouches. Rising from the bed, the sorcerer extinguished the lamp and the light of his staff and walked to the window. "What did you see of the man?" he said, eyes scanning the streets for signs of intruders.
"Nothing. He was dressed in black and he was fast."
"And he was really good with a blowgun," Earwig added, removing the top of his hoopak to reveal the exit hole for his own weapon. Unseen in the darkness, the Kandor took out the poisoned dart and tried to insert it into the blowgun. It wouldn't fit. It was too big. He stared at it, disappointed, until he realized that if he plucked away some of the feathers, the dart would fit quite nicely. He commenced plucking. "I didn't see anything of him either," said Raisin. Earwig slid the defeathered dart into a small hidden pocket on his sleeve and capped his hoopak. Yawning again, he unrolled his bedclothes, lay down, and was soon fast asleep. "Did you notice anything unusual when you were walking around inside of our house tonight?" Raisin asked suddenly.
"Unusual?"
Caramon was sick and dizzy and wanted only to go to sleep. "Unusual, bizarre, out of the ordinary. Did you see or hear anything you didn't understand?" Caramon thought back to Shavas's room, remembering the touch of silk, the feel between his fingers, cold satin turning warm. A wave of heat stole over his body. He thought about hearing Earwig's voice when the Kandor swore he hadn't been in the room. He thought about the fact that he had wandered through the house for hours, yet it seemed to him as if it had been only a few moments.
"No, nothing," was his short reply. "Leave the lady out of this, Raist. She didn't have anything to do with it. I drank too much, that's all. It was my fault."
"Perhaps," murmured Raisin. "I must get into that house again, alone."
"What?"
asked Caramon drowsily. "Nothing, my brother." The mage went to his bed. When he heard Caramon snoring, his breathing deep and regular, Raisin allowed himself to drift into sleep.
"Earwig, what are you doing?" "I'm sleeping. What does it look like I'm doing?" the Kandor retorted. Huge claws, black claws, the claws of a gigantic cat, made a swipe at him. Earwig just barely managed to dodge out of the way. "What are your friends doing?" "They're sleeping too." "Both of them safe, unharmed?" "Yes, now leave me alone. I have to get out of the way of this monster." The Kandor jumped over something that resembled a metal box with teeth. "I'll be back, Earwig. I'll be back. I'll be back." The next day, Caramon, after the night's sleep, felt as invigorated as ever. No trace of yesterday's sickness remained. Earwig, however, was cross and out of sorts. "What's the matter with you?" Caramon asked over breakfast. "Nothing," said the Kandor. "I didn't sleep well, all right." "Sure," said the astonished Caramon. "I was just asking. What are we going to do today, Raist?" 2 more days until the Festival of the Eye. There isn't much time. I wish I knew for what, thought Raistlin. Aloud he said, I think we should explore the rest of the city. What? Why? What are you looking for? Earwig asked sharply. The mage stared at the candor. Nothing in particular. Well, I'm coming too, Earwig announced. Where are we going? To the other 2 city gates, and then we'll work our way back into the center. The innkeeper says those black carriages are public conveyances, said Caramon, repeating the unfamiliar words carefully. You pay to ride them in. Councillor Chavas will pay for us to ride in them, said Raisin. Go find one. The companions took the carriage around the outer road to Eastgate. 3 major thoroughfares in Mereklar led from the gates to the center of town. The road they traveled cut across the lines of the city, making access to the other neighborhoods fast and efficient. The trip took a little more than an hour on the warm day. Cats were everywhere, lying on the sidewalks or sitting in the laps of people. Some of the more adventurous felines padded into the shops to browse with a few customers out in the streets, or climbed to rooftops to gaze down at the world below. It was Earwig who first noticed that some of the cats were following their carriage, maintaining a distance of 10 feet. When the coach slowed to move around people or a cart crossing a street, the feline slowed as well. Look, said the candor, entranced. When Raisin turned to investigate, the cats fled, all except one. That's the black cat, the one we found near the councillor's house. I don't know how you can tell, Raist, Caramon said. All black cats look alike to me. Except that there are no other black cats in the city. The carriage rolled off. It's following us. Caramon, his face unusually serious, leaned forward on the carriage seat. Raist, I don't like this. Any of this. I don't like the way that cat looks at us. I don't like people trying to murder us. I don't like the way the candor's acting. I'm not acting in any sort of way, protested Earwig. Caramon ignored him. It's not worth 10,000 steel pieces, Raist. Let's leave. Go find some nice, safe water. Raisin didn't answer at first, but stared out of the back of the carriage at the cat who was following behind. Then, nodding, he said, You're right, my brother. It isn't worth 10,000 steel pieces. He said nothing more. Caramon, heaving a sigh, sat back in the carriage. Eventually they reached a gate. Like the portcullis in the southern wall, it was also made from metal, decorated with strange plates and sheets, each inscribed with the head of a cat. What do you call this street? The mage asked the driver. This, sir? This is called Eastgate Street, sir. Councillor Chavas will pay your fare, Raisin said, climbing down out of the carriage. No need to wait. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. The driver whipped up his horses and left as quickly as he could, nearly running over Caramon and Earwig. Now that we're here, what do we do? Caramon asked. We get a drink, Raisin said, heading toward the first Java house he found. What? This time of morning? Since when? Shh, my brother, I'm thirsty. The fighter stared after his twin, wondering what had come over him. Shrugging, he grabbed the candle and followed. The Hiava shop was similar to all the other shops the companions had passed, offering tiny cups of the liquor with equally tiny saucers and chairs and tables for sitting outside. Earwig and Caramon both ordered straight Hiava with scones. Raisin bought a small glass of brandy. The three relaxed in the warm sun.
"Why did you get that?" Caramon asked. "I thought you wanted Hiava."
Raisin sipped at his brandy. Caramon sat brooding. Earwig ate his scone in one bite. Seeing that his large friend was not going to eat his scone, the Kender snatched the pastry off the plate, lifting it to his mouth.
"Hey, what are you doing?"
Caramon yelled, batting at the Kender's hand. "What shit?" Earwig yelled in return, trying to hang on to the scone. It broke apart in his hands and fell to the ground. "Now see what you've done. You've ruined my snack."
"Your snack?" the warrior said in disbelief. "What do you mean, your snack?"
"You weren't going to eat it, so I assume you wanted to give it to me."
"How do you know I was going to eat it?" "Oh, never mind. At least it won't go to waste."
Several cats had wandered by and, assuming that neither the Kender nor the fighter wanted the scone, took it upon themselves to resolve the argument. The warrior cheered at the sight, bent down to pet one of the animals. Out of the corner of his eye, he caught a glimpse of a figure dressed in black crouched in the shadows.
"Earwig,"
Caramon whispered.
"Do you see someone standing in that alley? No, don't look up."
"What?" the Kender said loudly, looking up. "Where?" Caramon gritted his teeth. There were times, he realized, when a Kender's companionship was not worth the effort.
"I said not to look."
"Well, how am I supposed to see if I don't look?"
"Never mind, it's too late now. Do you see somebody standing in that alley across the street?"
"No, not anymore," Earwig said. Caramon sat up and turned around, staring directly into the alley. No one was there. In fact, looking closer, the fighter saw that he must have been mistaken. What he had taken for a figure in black was a water barrel.
"Well," demanded Raisin. "Nothing, I guess. I'm just spooked from last night,"
Caramon muttered. Raising up from petting the cat, he saw, in astonishment, tears streaming down his twin's golden-skinned face.
"Raisin, what's the—"
"Nothing, Caramon," the mage interrupted. "In fact, quite the opposite. I'm beginning to understand something about this city." Raisin clenched his hand around his wooden staff to control his mounting excitement. "There are two lines," the mage concluded. "They both cut through the center of the two main streets. This one must also lead directly to the councillor's house, and I'll wager my staff that the third line run down the west street. Lines of power, stretching across the world perhaps, shining more brightly every moment. Lines that end here in this city, the city that stands before the first gods." "Caramon," said Raisin aloud, "I must have a sextant." The companions walked to the third section of the city, looking into several shops for the navigational tool. When they finally found one, a small brass sextant with an extremely accurate lens and even more accurate gradations, it was far too expensive. "A bargain," the shopkeeper assured them, but the mage handed it back.
"Can't you use Lady Shava's scroll to get it?"
Caramon asked. "No, it only allows for minor expenses. I doubt if a sextant counts as that." The brothers walked up the street, never noticing that the candor was missing until he rejoined them. "Raistlin," Earwig said, tugging at Majere's robes. A look of anger flared in the strange black pupils. "Don't you dare touch me, ever!" The mage shoved the candor back. "But I've got something for you," Earwig said. Reaching into his pouch, he pulled out the sextant. The mage brought his hand up over his mouth quickly, putting his fingers over his twitching lips.
"Earwig, where did you get that?" Caramon tried to sound severe.
"From the shop, of course," the candor said, nodding his head. "The owner said you could have it if you promised to return it when you were done." "Really? And the owner actually said this to you?" "Well, he didn't actually say it, but I'm sure he would have if he had been in the room." Raistlin averted his head. His thin shoulders shook, and Caramon could have sworn that his brother was laughing.
"Raist, don't you think we should return it?"
"What? And spoil Earwig's gift? Never," Raistlin said. He took the tool from the candor's hand and tucked it under his flowing robes to hide it from sight. "Thank you, Earwig," he said solemnly. "That was very thoughtful of you." "You're welcome," the candor said, beaming and looking much like the old Earwig. The travelers found another carriage. Raistlin directed the driver to take them to Westgate Street. By the time they reached their destination, the day was rapidly fading. The last portcullis was the same as the others, metal untouched by the elements, with the same indecipherable network of plates and shields on the bars. Next they went to another Java house, ordered the same drinks and food that they had ordered at the last one, with exactly the same results. Earwig tried to take Caramel's cone, and when the fighters slapped the candor's hand, the pastry broke and fell to the ground, only to be eaten by several cats sitting in front of the shop.
"I have to get my own table next time or I'll starve," the warrior muttered.
Caramon glanced into a shop across the way, a store displaying a variety of marvelous swords, and saw a dark-skinned man staring out the window directly at them. Boldly meeting the gaze of the mysterious watcher, Caramon shivered with cold, though the sun shone gently on his shoulders. There was something very strange about the man, strange yet familiar. The fighter turned to his brother, who was attempting to feed one of the cats a piece of his own scone. Caramon had never seen Raistlin show any affection toward animals. One of the cats nibbled at the offered crumb and bumped up against a golden outstretched hand, but soon backed away. The mage sighed, leaning on the staff of mages, gripping it tightly, an expression of enraged bafflement on his face. Caramon hated to disrupt his brother's thoughts, but this was important.
"Raistlin, we're being watched."
The mage barely glanced at him. "The man across the street in the weapons shop. Yes, I know. He's been there the past 10 minutes. Caramon half rose.
"You knew? He might be the one who tried to kill us."
"Sit, brother. Assassins do not watch their prey so openly. This man wants us to know that he's watching us." Caramon, confused, reluctantly sat back down. Earwig turned to look. "Hey, that's the man who wanted my necklace." "What? When?" Raistlin pounced on the startled candor. "Why," Earwig stammered, "it was, let me see, I remember, back at the Black Cat Inn."
"Why didn't you say anything to me then?"
Raisin practically frothed at the mouth. He began to cough, clutching at his chest.
"Hey, Race, calm down," said
Caramel. "Gosh, I forgot, I guess," Earwig said, shrugging. "It wasn't anything important. He just asked me where I got a necklace, and I said it had been my family. He seemed to want it pretty badly, and I didn't need it, so I tried to give it to him, but it wouldn't come off. Then a man who was with him said something about dragging out my guts, but they decided not to." Earwig sounded slightly disappointed. "Then they left." "I kind of like this necklace," the Cantor added, looking at it proudly. "I meet lots of entertaining people because of it. Another man at a tavern here in town tried to kill me to get it."
"I may kill you," gasped Raisin when he could breathe again. "When did this happen?" Caramon asked.
"Let me see. It was the night before the morning that I got into trouble with a woman in the inn. I was walking around the town when I heard men laughing. I looked into a window to see what was so funny, and I saw this man hit one of the barmaids. They threw him out, and he stood in the doorway and saw my necklace and said it was his. And he came at me with a knife, so I popped him with my hoop-ack, and the barmaid kissed me."
"Was it the same man who wanted your necklace the first time?"
"Of course not. That man was nice. This man wasn't."
"A name," Raisin mouthed. "Did you hear a name?"
"No." The Cantor frowned, looking back in time. "But I think the girl called him my lord."
Raisin drew a deep breath. Caramel started to go fetch hot water, but the mage shook his head. The spasm was over. Deep in thought, he stared at his gold-skinned hands. Caramel turned his head to see if they were still under observation. "He's gone," Raisin said. Caramel shivered. "It was like he could see right through me. Maybe he's a mage." "I don't think so." Raisin shook his head. "There are certain feelings shared among wizards. It's a feeling of..." He searched for a word. "Power. Our Watcher did not give me that feeling." "But he did give you some sort of feeling," Caramon said, hearing doubt in his brother's voice. "Yes, that's true. But whatever it was, I don't think it was the feeling I would get if I met another wizard." Caramon would have liked to ask why Raisin emphasized think, but the mage's cold expression cut off further conversation. The warrior was about to suggest that they get a full meal they all could enjoy. "It is time to go back to Southgate Street," Raisin forestalled him. "I want to meet again with the Councillor Chavas." Chapter 14. "We have decided to take the assignment," Raisin said. The councillor looked at each of the companions with an expression of extreme pleasure. "Thank you," she said. "Somehow I knew you would." With a graceful movement, she seated herself in a chair in front of a suit of armor. One of its gauntleted hands held a flamberge that was taller than the Cantor. Gesturing, Chavas invited the others to join her. It seemed to Caramon that the woman gazed at him with a knowing expression. "She knows that I was in her room," he said to himself, flushing in embarrassment. "She knows I handled her shawl." To conceal his confusion, he turned to the bookshelves and grabbed up the first volume he found. Raisin was talking with the councillor, discussing the terms of their arrangement, asking questions about the carvings on the walls. Caramon didn't pay any attention. He was thinking about the beautiful woman, rich, educated,
well born. She was far above him, out of his reach, like the moon and the stars. I'm making a fool of myself, Caramon thought. A woman like that could never love me. I'll stick to women like Maggie. But he couldn't keep himself from staring at her beautiful face. When the city was found, Chavas was saying, most of the walls were blank. We believe that the stone was sent by the first gods to the architects who built the city. It is unbreakable, though many tried. Some people noticed, however, that as time went on, carvings began to appear, as if somebody were engraving them into the stone by magic. She glanced at the still form of the mage. The engravings were of stories of some of the greatest events on Krynn, such as the fall of the king-priest of Ishtar, the legend of Huma, the story of Lord Soth, Knight of the Black Rose. Apparently some unknown force carves the tales of the world into the walls. Lord Soth, what a dumb name. Caramon tore his gaze away. Opening the book, he glanced through it. And what a dumb book, he decided, leafing from one sheet to the next till he reached the back cover. There were no pictures or writing or anything. Shrugging, he put the book back on the shelf where he had found it. Looking around, he saw Shava staring at him. The warrior flushed beneath her penetrating gaze. Did you find anything interesting? She asked. I doubt it, Raisin answered for his brother. Caramon is not particularly fond of reading. I, on the other, would be quite pleased if I could spend some time in your library. Of course, you may have free rein of my house and all its facilities. You all may, she added, looking at Caramon. The big warrior grinned at her, feeling more at ease. She might be rich and educated, but when it came right down to it, she was a woman after all, and he was a man. We'll need to meet with the other city council members as well, Raisin said sharply. Caramon glanced at his brother. If it hadn't seemed too impossible, he would have sworn his twin was jealous. I have already planned a meeting for tonight. Shava smiled coyly. As I said, I knew you'd accept. The meeting was held on Lord Brunswick's estate near the northern tip of the triangular walls of Mereklar. The Lord had sent his family out for the evening for the sake of privacy. The city's officials met in the library where the Lord kept the model of the city. Chairs and tables filled the already crowded room, making it seem much smaller than it really was. Caramon felt slightly claustrophobic and more than a little nervous at the prospect of being questioned by people as important as the ministers of Mereklar. Don't worry, brother, Raisin said from the dark engulfing cowl. You need not become involved. I will do the talking. The warrior relaxed. Sure, Raist, whatever you say. Earwig seemed to have shaken off his fit of grouchiness, for he kept Caramon half distracted by poking into everything. The candor nearly upset the model. He was caught trying to stuff a large book into his pouch. Eventually Caramon collared him and plunked Earwig down on the couch between him and Raisin, threatening to tie him up if he moved. The Kandor took the twist of metal out of his pocket and began shaking the bead, trying to make it fall out. The first to enter the room was Shavas, who took her place opposite the companions, the model of the city between them. Her white gown clung to her full figure, a pleasing contrast to her dark braided hair. Next to enter was Lord Brunswick, owner of the house. He moved slowly around the room to sit near Chavas. The minister's expression was blank and officious. Another man entered, Lord Alvin. He sat opposite Brunswick, casting a baleful glance at Racing. Other lords and ladies entered the room through the large double doors. A short man with dark hair and a mustache sat next to Lord Brunswick. To the left of Alvin sat another man, tall and lanky. Another woman walked into the room. Her hair was drawn back tightly from her face, a skull cap of wiry strands held by a short silver spike. With her came a stolid-looking man wearing a gray vest and slightly darker pants and shirt. He had a small scar under his right eye, and his black hair was swept back to one side. 3 other officials entered the room. 2 were men. One was enveloped by a flowing brown robe, a cleric of some religious sect. The other wore a ceremonial breastplate of steel and greaves of leather. The third was a woman dressed in a full blue robe. She wore an amulet whose symbol could not be seen. Chavas rose from her chair. Raistlin Majere, Caramon Majere, Earwig Lockpicker, may I present to you the council of the city of Mereklar? Lord Brunswick, Minister of Agriculture and our gracious host. Lord Alvin, Minister of Property. Lord Young, Minister of Internal Affairs. Lord Creole, Minister of Labour. Lady Massac, Director of Records. Lord Wrightwood, Minister of Finance. Lord Cole, Captain of the Guard. Lady Viola, Director of Welfare. Lord Mannion. Shaw stopped. Where is Lord Mannion? The other officials glanced around. I don't know, said Lord Alvin in a sour voice. He knew the time. I told him myself. He's never late. I don't like this. Chavas bit her lower lip. A line marred the marble smoothness of her forehead. Racing noticed that the fingers of one hand curled in on themselves, clenching into a fist. Perhaps we should wait, suggested the mage, rising to his feet. No. Chavas's face cleared, though with an obvious effort. He will be here shortly, I'm certain. Very well, Counselor. Excuse us a moment, Counselor, said Lord Cole. A word with you and the other members? In private. The ministers gathered around, talking in low voices. Racing, studying the people who had been studying him, decided he couldn't trust any of them. His experiences with officials in the past had taught him that alliances among rulers of state were both invisible and dangerous. The person caught in the webs of intrigue soon finds himself fed to the spider. He quoted to himself, recalling a proverb of the great political revolutionary Ayavel. He wondered what they were discussing and was considering gliding forward to overhear. When a shrill giggle made him recall something important he'd meant to do. Leaning over Caramon's back, Racing grabbed Earwig by the collar and drew him near with a golden skeletal hand. Earwig, do you recognize any of these men? Was one of them the one who tried to kill you? The Kender shook his head almost immediately. No, Race, but I could ask if they know who he...
Raisin glared, gripping the candle more tightly. "If you dare say as much as one word, I'll turn you into glass and drop you from a mountain top."
"Really? You'd do that for me?"
Earwig, touched, reached over to clasp in appreciation the thin fingers that held him. "Ouch!" The mage snatched his hand back quickly. "What did you do that for? You burned me."
"Nothing. I didn't do anything, Raistlin,"
Earwig protested, staring at his hand in bewilderment. Raisin grabbed the candor's wrist. Holding it up to observe it better in the lamplight, he saw a plain golden ring on the fourth finger. The mage glanced around quickly to see if anyone was watching. The ministers were still involved in their private concerns. "Earwig," he whispered, "where did you get this ring?"
"Ring? Oh, this. I found it somewhere,"
the candor replied glibly.
"I think someone dropped it."
Raisin took hold of the ring finger and muttered a simple spell. The ring began to glow, as if a light were shining on it from an unseen source. Magic. He tried to pull the ring from the candor's finger.
"Ouch! Stop that! It hurts! Hey, did you say my ring was magic?"
Earwig inquired eagerly. Raisin let go of the ring, and the candor rubbed his hand. "No, Earwig, I said tragic. It's tragic that someone lost such a valuable ring."
"Please, no more arguments."
Shavas's voice, sharper than normal, broke in on the mages. "Let us start." When everyone in the room had resumed their seats and quieted down, she continued. "This meeting of the Mereklar Council is different from any other gathering to date. Our city is in peril, and the fate of the world is in question. We have asked these men," gesturing to the companions, "to aid us in our time of need. The floor is now open to questions." "It's a strange coincidence that a mage shows up now. Who's to say that he's not the cause of our problems?" Lord Alvin sneered, pointing at Raisin. "All no wizards have always conspired to rule the world." "I tell you, Counselor, that we don't need them," Lord Cal added. "The city guard will take care of the matter. We just need more time."
"Please, Lord Alvin, contain yourself. You have no evidence to support your accusation. And you, Lord Carl, show respect for our guests," Shavas commanded. "I'm sure that if Lord Mannion were here, he would agree with the steps I've taken."
"I'm sorry, Majere, if I have slighted you." Lord Alvin apologized, though he said it between clenched teeth. Lord Cal said nothing. It seemed for a moment as if he might storm out of the room, but he finally subsided beneath Shavas's icy stare. "The mage is here only because of the 10,000 pieces of steel," stated Lord Brunswick.
"On the contrary," said Shavas aloofly, "Raistlin Majere has refused to accept any payment at all."
Obviously caught by surprise, the ministers glanced at each other. Caramon, just as shocked as they were, stared at Raisin incredulously. "He must be after something else then," Alvin said under his breath. "I must remind you, Lord Alvin," Raisin said from the depth of his cowl, "that according to tradition, the services of all wizards are free during the Festival of the Eye." "And may I remind you, Master Mage, that the festival is nothing more than a child's holiday, and legends or stories will never make it more than that." Alvin snorted. "Tell us why you're really here, if you dare."
"Lord Alvin!" Councillor Shavas cried, shocked. Since Lord Mannion is not here to keep you silent, I shall be forced to have you removed from these proceedings if you do not cease your outbursts. Thank you, Counselor, for your intervention, Rayson said, standing slowly, gripping the staff of mages in his right hand. But Lord Alvin's question is a legitimate one. My reason for remaining in your city is that I find it of interest. I have never seen a place of such beauty and wonder, and I will do whatever I can to help you. We of the Red Robes do not practice the dark arts of our black-robed brethren. We seek only to enlighten ourselves and grow in knowledge. Then you want simply to profit by the experience? Lady Volya asked, her chin propped up on a fist, staring intently at the mage. That is very astute, my lady. My companions and I believe that it is a virtue to help those in need without thought of worldly profit, Rayson said modestly. Caramon knew that his brother was lying. Rayson had never turned down an offer of money. Why is he telling them this? What's he really after? The fighter wondered. Looking at Councillor Shavas, who was regarding his brother with admiration, Caramon thought jealously that he knew the answer. Silence fell, the mage's remark having caught all of them off guard. Caramon could see, however, that Lord Alvin and Lord Cowell remained unconvinced, even as the other ministers were slowly changing their opinions. How do you intend to begin the investigation? Lady Massac asked. Rayson bowed slightly. Forgive me, my lady, but my methods are not open to discussion. This caused an outburst, the ministers all talking or shouting at once. Caramon, groaning slightly from having to sit in one place too long, shifted his position restlessly. Earwigs crashed his hand. The area around the ring was turning red and raw from his constant rubbing. Shavas beckoned to Lord Cowell. This is impossible. Go find Mannion. The captain left the room.